Hello, everyone. This is Craig Reese with South by Southwest. We are outside the Stateside Theater for the world premiere of A Small Light. We have the director here, the show creator here, some of the cast. We're going to talk to all of them on the red carpet, and then they're going to do a Q&A after the screening. Let's check it all out.
It is so amazing to be here for South by Southwest.
I love it here. It's my first time in the US.
When they told us that we were going to premiere here, we were thrilled.
This is the coolest festival of all the festivals.
The intention of the show from the beginning was to introduce this story to a new audience, to a younger audience.
Obviously, I think it's really important that we keep talking about issues of, nationalism and fascism and all the stuff that's like resurfacing in our world, but to do so through these characters who are so relatable and sort of timeless felt really exciting to me.
I play Miep Gies, who was responsible for hiding the Frank family in Amsterdam during the Second World War. She's an ordinary person who did some extraordinary things. I mean, she was a complete inspiration to me. She never wanted to be called a hero, but in my eyes, she definitely is.
I play Margot Frank, who is Anne Frank's sister, and she is such a sweet girl. She's kind of in the middle of taking care of her sister and also being there for her parents. She is such a character that I hold so deeply to my heart.
Well, actually, I got to know Anne. I knew the version of Anne that everybody knows, the innocent one. And I never got to read her diary, so during the audition process, I read her diary and I got to know that she's a true teenager. She has a cheekiness, bite back, she is strong. Because she was strong, I let myself be strong too during the whole filming process.
We worked on the show before we even started pitching it for about 5 years. We hired a researcher in Amsterdam who spoke Dutch, who could comb through the catacombs and could translate many interviews that Miep and Jan gave, but were in Dutch and had never been translated before. In doing that, we discovered all sorts of things about her and her husband. She was really a remarkable human being. Her mantra was, "Don't call me a hero. Anyone can do what I did. It's about making small choices moment by moment in your life."
Such a special project. The cast, the crew, the creative team, everyone that worked on A Small Light, such amazing people, such inspiring people.
It was really exciting to just think about making this show something that people would watch because they want to tune in and watch these people.
I'll get the Q&A started with a couple of questions, and then please feel free to raise your hand, wave at me. I have the light in my eye, so really wave at me, and I'll get to your questions. Welcome, you guys. Well, I guess this is more for Tony and Joan. I think that during the intro, you touched a little bit on it, but what brought you to this story? Why now? And how did you research the character of Miep?
Well, why now? Why now? I mean, it's so relevant, and we just were drawn to the story, and it just seemed so relevant, especially now with anti-Semitism on the rise. We wanted to tell this incredible story. We did a ton of research so everything you know about Miep, you know from Anne's diary, right? And when we started doing our research, we discovered that Miep and Jan were hiding many, many other people in and around Amsterdam that the Franks didn't know about because they had to keep it a secret. And then Jan was hiding people that Miep didn't know about. So in our research, we just started uncovering this insane story. And then we had to hire a researcher in Amsterdam and have all these interviews of Miep translated into English. And we just started years and years of trying to uncover and discover who they hid, where they hid them, all the research you do, right?
Yeah, and we were able to speak to people who'd never granted interviews before. Like you saw the little boy Alfred. Alfred actually talked to us and told us his story of how he survived. And so we were able at the end of our research to donate back to the Anne Frank house all of this research that we had done for scholars and for people to use, but just bringing the story in a way that hopefully feels contemporary and accessible. Our goal was always to put the audience in Miep's shoes and to get them to really feel those decisions, those day-to-day decisions that she's making throughout the series.
And especially, you know, to sort of go a little bit more into the why, you know, when Otto Frank, this is all true. So when Otto asked her, she said yes right away, like no hesitation. And he was like, think about it. And she didn't. And it really made me think, what would I do? You know, would I be so unhesitating, you know? And what it made me wonder, you know, this sort of unhesitating selflessness, I thought was really something, especially now, to explore. So, yeah.
The show comes with a little bit of a disclaimer saying that it is based on a true story, but that you did work out, like, you have some creative liberties to create the character, especially the character of Miep. Since we only know her through the diary, you had to actually do a little more and create a little more to have like a full fleshed out character. I was just wondering if you also use those creative liberties to make the show feel a little timelier.
Yeah, we knew that Miep described herself early on in her life as a bit of a party girl. She said that she was a peppy dancer. So we created the character of Tess, her best friend, to be able to explore that and also to show somebody who is similar to Miep but makes different choices as time goes on. We know from Miep's descriptions that her mother actually did encourage her to marry one of her brothers, one of her foster brothers. But
we love that detail.
Yeah, but we kind of created this character of Kaz because, as you'll see as the show goes on, the homosexual community in Amsterdam becomes very important because they were actively involved in the resistance. So we wanted a different way kind of into that story as well.
Belle, this is going to be incredibly obvious question, but how did you prepare to portray a character that is so important but that so few know about and that there is so little to actually research?
Well, Miep actually wrote her own book it's called Anne Frank Remembered. So I used that as my main source of research so I could really just get a sense of her voice. So I read that a few times, and she talks a lot about how she was a big party girl and loved dancing and how much she loved her husband and how in awe she was of Anne. Like, you do get a sense of her being. There was also a transcript of an interview that you sent me that I think Miep and Jan did much later in their lives.
In the 90s, yeah.
Yeah, that I used as well because you really get a sense of the banter and the way that they interacted with each other. But beyond that, I do think that as much as, yes, she's a hero and she did incredible things that any of us, none of us will ever do things like that, but she's also a very universal woman. I think they've written her, she's incredibly relatable, and I immediately kind of understood who she was in the way that I'm a young woman from the first time I read the pilot. So yes, it was a huge responsibility. It's a responsibility to Jewish people, to the history, to Anne, to Otto, to the Franks, to Miep, to Jan, but also it's a relatable human story, and I think that's what I had to hold on to while we were making it, because if you start thinking about the bigger picture too much, you sort of unravel a little bit.
Well, same for you, Billy, and Billy. Well, you start with you, Billy, but how did you approach a character that it's the opposite? We all know a lot about, so and the sense of responsibility is still huge, but it's completely different because for this one, we've seen it portrayed many times.
Yeah. So for me, I panicked slightly because everybody knows who Anne Frank is. So what I decided very much early on was to not watch anybody else's portrayal of Anne Frank. I wanted it to be my portrayal and the truest version I could do. And I also didn't read Miep's book or anybody else that wrote about Anne Frank because I didn't want to create an Anne through the eyes of somebody else. I really wanted to get into the head of Anne. So I audiobooked her diary many times and got the book, I had it, and went through different chapters of it to properly get into her headspace and how she thinks and what she thinks of other people. So when I got onto set or any scenes that were coming up, I could really create her inner monologue and how she would think and what she would actually reply to. It creates her true emotions, and for me that's what I really wanted to hone in on, was just Anne Frank herself, no one else's portrayal, no one else's opinions on her, just herself and my opinion on her and how to step into somebody as big as Anne Frank.
Well, same for you. What do you think, Ashley?
I didn't know Anne had a sister before I auditioned for this role. And I thought that was actually really special. And the first thing that I did was I read Anne Frank Remembered, because I know we were taking it through the perspective of Miep, and I was so in awe. And I had Anne's diary in my room. It's been in my room since I was a child, and I reread it, but then I also took into account that these are other people's perspectives. What's so fascinating to me is that Margot did have her own diary, and if she actually was able to tell her story, what would be in that diary? So a lot of my research was based on other people's perspectives, but also, my own perspective. And also, my grandma is a Holocaust survivor, and before this, I was able to watch her testimony, and that was really special. So a lot of the work that I did as Margot was kind of based off of my grandma's story, too. So that's how I researched for Margot.
Well, down to you now, Susanna. How did you approach this first episode? Because you had to, in this first episode, you really have to set the tone for the full season. But it's also like a first episode, so there has to be a lot of exposition, so we get a good sense of all the characters. So I was just wondering how you balanced both this very exposition, getting to know the character, and at the same time you really had like a pacing that really starts amping up as the episode goes on.
Well, Joan and Tony and I had been working on this for a long time together. They had come to me with the idea, really fully fleshed out story that they wanted to tell, but we talked about tone a lot, and we got a chance to really rehearse those conversations amongst ourselves as we tried to sell the show. So we talked a lot about how we didn't want to do a sort of frozen in history, like homeworky, dry version of the story. We just wanted to tell the most immediate, relatable, emotional human story that we could. So I think the North Star for us was always that, does this feel true? Does this feel specific to these people and their emotional lives, not some idea of what it should be. So I think part of it for us was not playing the end before we got to the end. So each day these people are sort of looking at each other like, I don't know, is it bad today? How bad is it going to get? Just take it day by day, just the same way that we are when we read the news now and deal with the global situation that we're in. I won't elaborate on that. But it's that. So we talked a lot about that, and we tried to just take it really granularly, like what is this person feeling in this moment, and not try to do like an outside in, let's make it funny now, or let's do this, just trying to be present the way that these characters were. So, I think the exposition, I think hopefully it just organically stems from each moment feeling really true, and we tried to, that was a challenge often on the set. There would be like a moment that would feel, is this too contemporary? Does this feel weird? Let's come up with a different way to do it that feels, timeless, not too now, not too a modern person trying to seem like they're in 1939. So anyway, it was just an ongoing conversation that we all had, but we're a really good team, so we just talked everything through.
I think the other thing that Susanna managed to bring to it was a tremendous sense of humor, which was always very important to us as well in the conception of it, because, we've all just lived through the pandemic. We're still living through it, but I don't know about the rest of you, but we got through it and managed to cope with the day-to-day stress through humor. And the survivors that I know, many of them have a fantastic sense of humor, and I can't believe that was not present at the time as well. So that was a big thing, because I think there's a reverence around the story of Anne and her and what happened to her and her family, and I think that part of making this story accessible is to kind of clear that reverence away, because I don't believe they were living a reverent life. I think they were living life. So.
the two of you just touched a little bit on it, but was it challenging to approach the story, as you said, from back then? Because we're seeing the story with everything we know. We know exactly what's going to happen, which ultimately there's the one scene where Miep goes, oh, nothing is going to happen. The queen said no, and then boom, title card, 3 days later, it's Nazis everywhere. And I was just wondering if it was challenging to approach the story without thinking about what's going to happen next.
It was definitely something we continually had to remind ourselves to do. I remember Tony said it to me, and the first time we met in your office, you said, don't play the end at the beginning. But it is so important, and it isn't something I'd actually thought about then when I was doing like my prep. So for me, I had to definitely remind myself of that every day. But the closer that we got as a family unit, just as people working together, the more I did forget how it's going to end. And I mean, yeah, when you get to episode 6, you'll forget too. Like, and yeah, so just to continue reminding ourselves that, you know, it was the present for them. Yeah.
And they all believed they were living in the modern world. They had toasters, and they had washing machines, and they lived in contemporary buildings, and we would go into the actual apartments, and you'd be like, okay, I could absolutely live here. I mean, and I think it's difficult for us to keep that in mind, that this did not happen that long ago, and that the people to whom it was happening could not imagine in their modern world that such a thing could happen.
Yeah, I think that's the timeliest thing of the show, is that just people could not imagine it could happen, and then 3 days later it's here, which plot twist could happen anytime. If any of you guys have any questions, please raise your hand. I'll start with you. Yes, you in the reddish shirt. Is it red? I don't know. So this is a question about the general presence of humor throughout the show, whether it is in the conception, the writing, and also in the acting.
Well, I think Tony said it. You know, we just put ourselves in the mindset of Miep and Jan, and so we're married, as I stated previously. And I really, and I just kept thinking, these guys are in their first year of marriage when she has said, sure, I'll help hide you. And remember pandemic, how it was going to be 2 weeks? Remember that? She didn't know this was going to be 2 years. She didn't know what she was doing. And that really struck me, how you're like, oh, okay, it's still going on. Oh, the dentist asked me, okay. Oh, these kids now need to be hidden. Like, it just, once you say yes, and then you're like, where do I draw the line? And then you're also like, we imagined, Susanna, Tony, and I imagined this conversation. I don't know that it exactly ended up in the next episode, but when they have to hide the kids, we imagined a very real sort of version of a conversation where Miep and Jan are talking and they're going, she's our landlady. We don't even know her that well. Why should we have to do this? Like, we can't do this, right? We're not going to do this. So, like, just, you know, I know I'm not answering your question about the humor, but the sort of, like, just reality of dealing with this thing as it rolls at you lends itself at times in a marriage, Miep and Jan's marriage, to humorous situations or comments or relief, you know, jokes that you have to make in order to survive. So it wasn't difficult. It seems like what it would be like you'd make jokes, you'd laugh, and human beings look for joy and look for hope. And I think the people in the annex were always looking for hope. What's the news? It's going to end. What do you hear? They're having bad days, but they're always looking for a moment of hope and goodness. And I'll stop talking now.
But yeah, Belle, Billy, Ashley, if you want to talk a little bit about that, about how you try to, in your performance, to incorporate some levity.
I just think, like, in all my work and all of the performances that I admire and all of the films, TV shows, whatever, that I love, like, the two go really hand in hand. Like, things can be tragically funny and they can be funnily tragic. Tragedy and comedy, they go together in art and in life. That's just natural. That's just how it goes.
For me, I just have to keep reminding myself it's your family. So, with your family, you joke around with them. Obviously, Ashley played my sister, so I just have to keep thinking about my sister and how, the looks that I would give to her or the things that I would do or how I would get annoyed at her during, like, the smallest little things, So I just had to keep reminding that she was my sister, and obviously we created a great relationship, so it was a lot easier as it went on to just, throw some things in there. Like, catch her off guard, whatever it is. It got easier during the rest of it.
I think for the acting side, you can't really play humor. It comes through good writing, it comes through the relationships that come into the good writing, and it comes through the choreography of the scene, and then you play the truth of the scene. But yeah, it was really pretty easy because our relationships were, growing throughout the process of filming, and we were so lucky to be able to hang out off, when we weren't filming, and so I think that really helped with the acting portion of the humor.
Anyone else? Yeah, right here in the black sweater. Okay, so this is a question about how you prepared for the scenes where it's a little bit agoraphobic for all your characters. I'm not sure I heard everything, but I think that was it, right?
Well, our set of the annex was built pretty much like centimetre by centimetre replica of what the annex actually was. If any of you have been to the Anne Frank house, we literally had a replica on the sound stages in Prague, and it is really claustrophobic in there. I mean, when you've got 9 actors, 9 people, and cameras and crew members, I can't even begin to imagine what it have been there like to actually live there for 2 years. For me, that was all I needed, was to be on that set. It was built so wonderfully where it was so large and on multi-levels, so we could shoot where we were walking from the office and up the stairs and back and opening the bookcase and into the annex. And those things on a set are invaluable. Like, it makes you really feel like you're there, and yeah, that really gave a sense of claustrophobia massively.
For me, I definitely drew on COVID. I mean, that was not great, but good to draw on. It really helped. You had to think back to it, but it helped to remember that you couldn't go outside and that you saw your family 24/7 and had no privacy at all. And it came in a great moment because my sister we just moved, And my sister was going to uni, so she moved out of the house. So she was actually in my room for a solid 3 weeks. So whilst I was actually preparing for the role, I had my sister in my room. And she's 20, so again, that I drew on that, which really helped when I got the scripts in. But for me, definitely the set as well was centimetre by centimetre. It was the exact same. So all those 3 moments for me really helped to just feel the overwhelmingness of the claustrophobia.
I'm trying to think. I mean, the set was so amazing to be able to see it built, and we got to tour the Anne Frank museum, and we saw it ourselves how claustrophobic it was, and you're always keeping it in mind, how loud that you can be. We were, when we were in the museum, we could hear footsteps right above us, and in my head I was like, wow, so they have to really be quiet when they're up in the Xanax. So a lot of the claustrophobia, it comes from just the setting and the circumstances.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would just say that in terms of creating the feeling of it, just aesthetically, a lot of it was just, in a lot of TV shows, you're trying to sort of get this size shot of each individual person, but there were a lot of scenes where we're like, no, everyone's just in the room. This is like this is the common room, and there's like always 11 people in it or whatever. So it just feels that way to be there. There's just always people on top of each other, and allowing those shots to have choreography within the shot, but letting the shot just contain a ton of people all the time moving around and doing their thing adds to it too. Just the feeling of how many people were in that room constantly interacting or trying to get some privacy by sitting in a corner by themselves or having an existential crisis on the floor in the middle of the morning. Like whatever it is, they're just constantly trying to create a little space for themselves when there's no space at large. So trying to do that was something that we, just in terms of like framing the shots even, just trying to get that feeling of, wow, there's nowhere for these people to go. Yeah.
We only have time for a couple more, so you're gonna be here.
I'm not from here, so sorry for my English. In my country, there is a big discussion. It was a couple years ago. It was now silent because of political reasons. There was a discussion about members of the local society actively helping Nazis treating Jewish people. From what I saw in the first episodes, Dutch people in your movie are helping Jews, or they are indifferent. Do you have an idea? Did you have an idea to deal with the problem of Dutch people actively cooperating with Nazis?
Yes. As the show goes on, you'll see members of the NSB, which was the Dutch Nazi Party. And as I said before, the character of Tess and her boyfriend Daniel, you'll see them move further and further into active collaboration with the Nazis, which causes this break between her and Miep. But yeah, that was very much a part of it. And in fact, just, I think maybe a month ago, the Dutch government has decided to make public all of the records of people who were collaborators that they have kept under wraps until now, I think in an attempt to hopefully have that generation die out. But there's a whole host of people who have no idea what their parents or grandparents actually did during the war, because that generation typically, a lot of people didn't want to talk about it. Yep. But yeah, collaboration with the Nazis was a very big thing. And in the Netherlands, Hitler fully expected, similar I think to Putin today, Hitler fully expected the Dutch people to welcome him with open arms because they were technically Aryans.
I just want to add to this comment and just say that one thing the show explores, I think really interestingly, is the idea of not just active collaboration but passive collaboration too. And for instance, you can see Miep and Tessa's relationship. With that relationship, we wanted to just create the idea of, it starts with just a disagreement with a friend, or a friend makes one comment and you're like, well, that's a little off for what I would think. And then over time you grow apart, but it's like those little decisions, little opinions on a news story. And just with our like political situation now, sometimes you have conversations with your friends where you're like, well, I can't talk about that with my friend because they just, or oh my God, did you hear that person's comment or what that person posted online? That's, whatever. So we also wanted to get into the effect that those little differences have on friendships, relationships with your parents, romantic relationships, that like, there's also just ways that people are kind of complicit by just not being actively resisting. And for some people that's really complicated. It's not that everybody who didn't do what Miep and Jan did was evil, there were, Tessa's character has complicated reasons for needing to be in that relationship that she's able to justify what she's doing. We wouldn't justify it, but we can see her justification. So we try to humanize everybody in the show that we focus on, even when they're doing things that are like questionable by the ethical standards of people looking back on history,
Yeah, and Miep, in real life, Miep and Jan didn't tell anyone. They didn't tell a friend. They didn't tell a family member. They were really, like, kept that locked down. By the end of the war, or when the Franks got arrested, Miep said lots of people in the neighborhood came up to her and let her know they knew. A lot of people in the neighborhood knew people were hiding there. And as the war continued and the Germans were losing and they were getting angry and frustrated, the money you could get to turn a Jew in just kept going up and up and up. And so sometimes, people will say, do you deal with the question of who turned them in? And we don't, except we introduced some characters who could have. Miep always famously said, it could have been anyone, it doesn't matter, and I don't think we'll ever know. The book that came out like a year ago that was going to be like the sort of be-all, end-all answer wasn't. But there were lots of people who knew, it could have been lots of people. So.
We only have time for one more, and it's going to be you.
Hi. So you look at the PP program on Southwest, and this show is really unique in the sense that it's more of a classic drama. All the other ones, you see like genre, thriller, action, and all that. So my question is like, how hard was it for you just like do like more or less like a classic period drama? And if there are any elements that you felt that you had to add, but the trailer shows a little bit more action, more thriller side of things. So you felt that you need to, maybe show an element that you needed to add a little cast in order to maybe survive in the TV climate.
I mean, it is a thriller, because shit happens. And we know how to make TV, and so we want to sort of keep the momentum going. We were really cognizant of how to make, a watchable television show. So that was just like normal,
But the story didn't really need much help from us in terms of just episode to episode. In fact, when we originally talked to Nat Geo, we said we think it's about 7 episodes. And then we got halfway through the writing process and realized, we need one more. There's enough story here for one more, and if we don't take the time to tell this particular element of the story, people are really going to miss it. And so, to their credit, Nat Geo said, great, take an extra episode.
But like good television, like we leave you on cliffhangers. You know what I mean? Like that was important. But the story has it. Like suddenly Miep and Jan have a secret from one another. We were like, oh my God, that's going to be amazing. So the story just, with all the people they have to hide and juggling all of that, does have elements of action and thrillerness.
On that note, please don't forget to vote. The QR code is right there, and give them a very warm applause.
All right, that'll conclude our coverage of the world premiere of A Small Light. I hope you liked our red carpet and Q&A coverage. Please check out all our other videos that we shot this week, and we'll see you next time.